The illusory truth effect is a phenomenon that was first detailed in a 1977 study. It's the inclination of people to believe false information after being exposed to that false information many times. Repeated exposure to lies caused the false information to feel familiar to the participants. In that study, they found out that the more familiar the information feels, the more likely that familiarity overpowers a person's rationality. In other words, the more you hear something, the more it feels right. Further studies showed that the illusory truth effect could even make people have false memories, and that people with names that were easier to pronounce were more readily believed by participants of the study. This is a powerful psychological tool that grifters employ on their audience, and its effects are seen every single day. How many times have you heard vaccines cause autism or go woke, go broke? There is a reason these people repeat these mantras over and over, even in the face of conflicting evidence, and that's because repeating false information makes it more likely to be believed. Here's a network graph of the phrase go woke, go broke on Twitter from August 2022 to February 2023. The blue represents left-leaning users, while the red represents right-leaning users. The irony of the shape formed by right-wingers isn't lost on me. A literal dickhead. This brings me to the subject of this video, Will Jordan, aka The Critical Drinker. Tell me, how many times have you heard him say, "The message"? What's up everyone, it's your friendly neighborhood Birdman here. Today, I'm going to question why people believe this grifter and show you precisely why you shouldn't. Due to the kinds of people this video is sure to attract, I think I need to put my cards on the table. Firstly, I am not a political type. I rarely, if ever, bring up politics, and when I do, it's usually to make fun of them, left or right. For this behavior, I have been routinely called right-wing and left-wing by people who make politics their entire identity. My position is that political folk are mirror images of each other participating in the Spider-Man meme, where they blame each other for doing exactly what they themselves are doing, something the drinker is heavily guilty of. I think it's silly to adhere to political sides because at some point in time, you're going to have to defend nonsense to maintain the integrity of being on that side. The only side I'm on is reason, logic, facts, science, and math. So believe me, when I criticize this very obviously right-wing chud, I'm doing so out of the spirit and integrity of unbiased media discourse, which is something I care about deeply. Less important, but still worth the mention, I'm not doing this out of jealousy or an attempt to clout chase. I've been calling out a much bigger YouTuber for nearly 7 years. For me, this is simply calling out another bad critic. That out of the way, it's difficult to know where to even start with this guy. He is absolutely rich with misinformation, outright lies, and baffling takes that don't stand up to even an ounce of scrutiny. In my last video, I played an excerpt from his infamous Across the Spider-Verse video.
Also, I can't shake the feeling that the script is doing everything in its power to play down Peter Parker, like it's afraid the audience will somehow start rooting for him over Miles if he's shown to be too capable and confident. The first movie portrayed him as an aging, burned out loser who only redeems himself at the end, while the second film morphs him into a bumbling, hapless father in a pink bathrobe who for some reason keeps taking his baby along on life-threatening adventures despite having a perfectly capable mother at home to look after it. Is this some weird attempt to mock and belittle the Spider-Man that most people know and love, who incidentally just happens to be the only straight white man in the entire movie? I don't know man, it just kinda leaves a sour taste in my mouth, that's all.
The first thing you'll notice if you've seen that movie is that he's just blatantly incorrect. Peter B. Parker is not the only straight white male in the film. In fact, there are many of them, quite a few of them variants of Peter Parker himself. More importantly, there is a prominent supporting character that is the motivation for Spider-Gwen's entire arc in the film, Captain Stacy. The next issue you might see is the claim that Peter is being irresponsible by bringing his daughter on, and I quote, life-threatening adventures despite having a perfectly capable mother at home. Again, if you've watched this movie, you'd know that Peter's presence in the film was entirely to be a familiar face for Miles and to help him accept his canon event, not go on a life-threatening adventure.
You're the reason I had her, okay? I thought that if I did a decent job raising her, that there was a chance she was gonna turn out like you. And that got me excited because you are a wonderful person. and I like being around you.
Moreover, May Parker has superpowers, and her dad would likely be the only one in the relationship physically capable of corralling the clearly energetic child. What's more is he brought her to probably the safest environment she could possibly be. A hub with a million other superheroes. The less obvious observation is that Will is a race baiter. The Spider-Verse films, while featuring a black protagonist, do not contain the themes of race relations. The more astute of you will then ask, well, why even bring that up at all? And therein lies the problem. Will's goal with many of his film reviews is to galvanize his mostly male, mostly white, and mostly straight audience around the idea that they are being attacked for being those three things. You do this often enough, and the audience will begin to believe it. Hence, that atrocious reading of Across the Spider-Verse. But it gets even better. Here he is doing the same thing to the Batman.
Seems to be a bit of a debate going on about whether or not this movie is woke, mainly because of the demographics of certain characters. And to be fair, there is a bit of evidence to support this claim. If I was a cynical man, I'd say it's kind of interesting that the rich, corrupt scumbags targeted by the Riddler all happen to be straight, white, middle-aged men, but hey, I guess that's just a total coincidence.
Seriously. What the fuck does this movie have to do with race? He has straight white men in his mouth so often you'd think he was an escort. If he applied even a little of that gray matter, maybe he'd come to the conclusion that most rich people in our society tend to be white men. The Riddler was going after police officers and politicians, and again, in our society, they tend to be white. What Drinker is asking for here is diversity, but only amongst the villains of the film. Moreover, what he's conveniently leaving out is Riddler also attempted to assassinate the mayor-elect, a black woman. If all of this wasn't baffling enough, he himself states this film isn't about race.
And to be fair, Kravitz and Jeffrey Wright both do a great job with the roles they're given, and apart from one poorly judged line from Catwoman right at the end, race never really comes into the picture. So I guess what I'm saying here is that while the movie takes a few little stabs at modern day social issues, it really never dominates the narrative.
Does he even hear himself? Listen to this incredible leap in logic for Godzilla vs. Kong.
And oh look, Kong's been abducted from his homeland and taken across the ocean to America in chains. I mean, there's on-the-nose writing, and then there's next-level stuff like this. I wonder who you're supposed to sympathize with here.
Yes, Drinker just called African slaves apes and tried to frame it as the screenwriters doing so. That, my children, is what we in the English-speaking world call projection. And like almost every observation this guy makes, it's hilariously wrong. They're not even taking Kong to America. They're going to Antarctica in this scene. So not only did he get the scene wrong, he saw racial themes in a film where there are none because his brain immediately goes to black people when he sees an ape in chains. In my last video, I showed a tweet by Drinker that I thought made it painfully obvious what his positions on black people in the media were. What I didn't account for was the insane mental gymnastics people would perform in order to deny that his post was racist in nature. So here's a tweet from a different person. If you're unfamiliar, this person is Nick Fuentes, a proud white supremacist. Sounds contradictory, I know, what with being a Mexican and having a name like Fuentes while being a white supremacist, but no one ever said white supremacists were intelligent. The point is, doesn't this tweet seem to be placing emphasis on a specific character in the Minecraft movie? I mean, now that I've told you this person is a white supremacist, it's obvious what his issue is, isn't it? So I'll ask again, what do you honestly think Will's problem with this image was? Do you really believe he's this upset about Jason Momoa's character here? Hold that thought. We're just getting started.
Conservatives do this thing where they'll sit in a room, they'll watch a girl and a guy go into the other room, and they'll hear her screaming for 30 minutes and then come back out like bloodied and bruised, and you'll be like, bro, did that guy just beat the shit out of her? And the conservatives will look you in the eye, dead in the eye, into the ovals of your soul. They will look into you, and they will say, I didn't actually see it happen, did you? How can you even prove that? Like, why would you assume that? Do you even fucking know? Like, they're the most shameless bad faith people need. They're shameless.
One of the tactics of grifters and their parrots is to attempt to maintain an air of plausible deniability so that when they are criticized for their bigotry, they can hide behind deflections. In my previous video, I brought up one of them, the "but Ripley from Alien" defense. In short, these people try to use examples that match or are similar to the identity of a group that they regularly target to pretend they are not prejudiced against that group. In political discourse, this is probably more well known as, "but I have black friends." We know that doesn't actually work as a defense because we have actual history of slave owners falling in love with their slaves and that male sexists still love their female family members. But when you have sustained and consistent campaigns against certain groups of people, it's entirely reasonable to suggest you have a dislike for those groups. For Will, one of those groups is women. Let's examine one of the most egregious cases of Will's attempts at plausible deniability. On January 5th, 2020, Drinker uploaded a video about The Mandalorian. In it, he had this to say about Gina Carano.
But for the life of me, I'll never understand why they cast Gina Carano. I mean, she's big and burly, and she obviously knows what she's doing when it comes to the fight scenes, but she's a fucking cage fighter, not an actor. Watching her trying to emote is almost as painful as watching Brie Larson trying to be funny. Oh well, it could have been worse. They could have cast Ronda Rousey.
Pretty obvious he dislikes this person and thinks she shouldn't be an actor. Fair enough. However, later that year, Gina got into a string of spats on Twitter that had her facing accusations of racism and bigotry, and she was subsequently fired by Disney. Then, a few months later, Drinker makes a video about Gina so embarrassing, you just have to hear it to believe it.
Gather round, dear viewer, as I tell you a tale. It's the tale of a woman who stood tall in the face of jealousy, cowardice, hatred and vengeance, and dared to utter a single word. No. It's the story of the girl who wouldn't back down. She fought and won many battles and earned herself great acclaim. But the young woman had her eyes set on a higher goal, and eventually she gave up her life of fighting, travelling instead to the great kingdom of Hollywood to seek fame and glory as an actor instead. And as it turns out, her long years of training and fighting served her well, and soon she was chosen for many roles on the silver screen. Her triumph was cemented when the king and queen chose her to play a soldier, fighting amongst the stars themselves. Her fame was growing fast, but sadly, so was her list of enemies.
This is a flip-flop so insane, it could put Crocs and Birkenstock out of business. And this isn't even the only video he's made about her. Listen to this nonsense.
One of the problems with hiring strong independent women to work at your company, instead of the usual assemblage of soft, entitled, like-minded corporate drones that have never had an original thought in their entire lives, is that they don't always think, say, or do the things that you want them to. Case in point, Gina Carano, a former women's MMA fighter turned actor who was brought in to play Cara Dune on The Mandalorian, and at first, all seemed well. The show was a success and Carano's character soon became a fan favourite. Unfortunately, she began to ruffle feathers behind the scenes at Disney Lucasfilm by refusing to spout the same politically acceptable talking points as everyone else at the company, and even dared to express some conservative political views at times.
He spoke about this person like she was a dog, outright saying she can't even act, but as soon as she spouts nonsense and conspiracy theories and gets fired for her troubles, he's writing poems and puff pieces.
But for the life of me, I'll never understand why they cast Gina Carano. I mean, she's big and burly, and she obviously knows what she's doing when it comes to the fight scenes, but she's a fucking cage fighter, not an actor. Watching her trying to emote is almost as painful as watching Brie Larson trying to be funny.
This man is shameless. If it isn't obvious by now, he has a clear political agenda, and this colors his work. Before he knew she shared political opinions that align with his grift, she was a girl boss, only here to promote Kathleen Kennedy's woke agenda, and shouldn't have even been cast. But now, she's a shield he can use to deflect criticism about his obvious disdain for strong female characters. You know, look over here and pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Has spoken! Who are you?
Speaking of agendas, the Barbie movie and his subsequent analysis evaporated any hope I had left for this man's integrity. Listen to how he sums up the marketing of the film and then his reading of the actual film's release.
Now, before I dive into this review properly, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work and genius PR campaign of the Warner Brothers marketing department. You guys really pulled off a miracle with this one, successfully duping all of us, including me, into believing that Barbie was going to be just another colourful, light-hearted, easygoing family comedy with some cheeky, self-aware humour, ironic meta-gags, and probably capped off with a blandly inoffensive female empowerment message about girls learning the value of their own potential. What none of us expected was 114 minutes of spiteful, bitter, mean-spirited, borderline unhinged hatred of men and everything even vaguely associated with them. Barbie is like the deformed, mutated rage child of Captain Marvel, Ghostbusters 2016 and She-Hulk. It is pure brain cancer in movie form, and I was genuinely shocked by the sheer, undisguised contempt this film has towards 50% of the human population.
Besides the fact that this is one of the most hyperbolic, nonsensical summations of this movie, how could he have possibly come to that conclusion for the film's marketing? It was plainly obvious that Margot's Barbie was the main character and that she would face an existential crisis.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
On top of that, they show Barbie's feet going flat, suggesting that the film would be clearly feminist in nature, as feminists have been arguing against heels for decades. The marketing material also shows Barbie entering the real world and experiencing sexual assault, and I can only conclude that Drinker's media literacy is questionable at best. To belabor this point, he's been caught changing the titles of his videos after a media property releases to hide his terrible perception of marketing material. And if all that wasn't enough to prove that Mr. Jordan has the integrity of a sandcastle, here's something that was brought to my attention. On one of Drinker's live streams, he attributed a false quote to Isabella Merced about the failure of Madame Web.
Some of the stars of the film have got theories about why that is, and one of them is right here. Isabella Merced? Is that the word? Merced?
Sure. Yeah.
She said it failed for one simple reason. For the same reason that the Marvels or Bird of Prey failed, because the male audience still hides a deep contempt for everything that is starring strong, independent women.
Oh, God. The truth is the truth, I guess.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely the reason Birds of Prey failed and the Marvels. It wasn't because they were bad films that no one wanted. For sure.
Isabella was, of course, inundated with hate from parrots that took these quotes at face value because why would grifters lie to them? She then had to come out and deny these clearly false allegations, but by then, the damage was already done. To date, there has been no update, no retraction, no public apology on Twitter from Will Jordan for spreading this quote, and that's because he has a vested interest in seeing the culture war proliferate in media discourse, as this is profitable for him. Even if he didn't know the quote was fake, this shows the lack of research and effort he puts into his work. No discernment, no ability to perform an investigation, and hastily attributes an obviously fake quote in a concerted effort to confirm his biases. Why would you take anything he says seriously at this point? How can you trust he's done the homework? This is not the first time he's been caught manipulating a narrative. The YouTuber Pillar of Garbage exposed Drinker for lying about scenes in Glass Onion because Drinker has a political gripe with Rian Johnson, the director of Glass Onion, and The Last Jedi, a film he and his ilk have pilloried for the past 7 years because of perceived wokeness. Here's a clip.
The example Drinky gives for Rian Johnson's blatant rewriting is the scene where Blanc and, as we later see, Helen spot Duke's voyeurism.
Batista's watching his girlfriend supposedly having an affair with Miles only to be observed by Blanc. Now look at the later version of this exact same scene. Notice how Helen's been added in here when she totally should have been visible before.
Except no, that isn't true. There's a reason the Drinker plays these clips on mute. Let me put the sound back on for you. That was the first time we see this. There's a close shot of Duke, then we hear the twig snap, and then we pull back to a shot revealing Blanc. Here's the scene as we're shown it later on. We start with this slightly wider shot, revealing Blanc and Helen, then Helen leaves, causing that sound, and Duke turns round. This point is the moment we saw earlier on, and there's a very obvious, very obtrusive sound cue, the sole purpose of which is to communicate precisely this. Look, you can enjoy the way moments like this toy with the audience perspective, complementing the film's themes, these ideas of how we see and how we falsely composite and rationalize these perceptions away from the truth, away from what's really plainly shown to us, or you can dislike it. But what you can't do is lie about how the film constructs moments like these on a mechanical level. And that's what the drinker does here to cap off his video, to build into this last point.
Why would Drinker do that? Is he incompetent, or is he a blatant liar? These are the only two choices you have, and both of them are damning for his reputation. And yet, he doesn't seem to care, because I guess his followers don't seem to care. I mean, he publicly demonstrates that he can't keep up with basic logic all the time. Look at this tweet from Star Wars Holocron. They are very obviously making the point that sometimes a show's first season isn't always where it finally ends up, with a couple examples including The Clone Wars and Breaking Bad. When Will saw this, I mean, how do you fail at understanding the point this hard? This is one of two things. He either understands the point being made but is attempting to misrepresent the point to, again, galvanize an already volatile audience against a contentious product, thereby sending his parrots to harass this account, which actually fucking happened, or he doesn't understand the purpose of an analogy. Stupid people do this all the time. You'll say, well, fish swim and Olympic sprinters run, with the underlying logic being how they locomote, and the stupidest person you know will say, did you just compare a fish to an Olympian? And this is exactly why analogies are on IQ tests. But I'm willing to be charitable to Will and suggest it's the former, that he knows the point that's being made but is misrepresenting it to fit the narrative he's trying to push. I mean, the alternative is to suggest he's low IQ. And I would never do that. His Twitter alone is an embarrassment of narrative pushes, from platform-boosting known anti-black racists like Kang Min Lee to even shit-talking PETA. Because he perceives them to be left-wing, I guess? I don't know, that last one was just amusing to me. So I bring you back to this tweet. What do you honestly think he's saying here? So far, we've demonstrated he will lie or manipulate a narrative, use a member of a group that he regularly targets as a form of plausible deniability, that he clearly has issues with minority groups, and that he perceives women being in these roles to be a political push. Which of the humans in this image fits all that criteria? What this person does is not honest critique. He looks for ways he can jimmy in alt-right political talking points under the guise of being a movie reviewer. And I know his fan base doesn't want to believe that he is prejudiced against minority groups, but after everything you've seen here, if you're an honest person, you're at the very least asking questions. Why would he bring up conversations about race in films where that isn't the focus? Why would he lie and manipulate footage of a film made by a person that he politically disagrees with? Why is he spreading misinformation about a woman and attributing political positions to her? What does any of this have to do with film? This is because he's not a film reviewer. He's a political ideologue that complains almost exclusively about mainstream media to push rhetoric. In fact, you'll never see him talking about or promoting anything that's not mainstream unless it's an attempt at a narrative push. So yeah, he'll talk about Squid Game or Kingdom because they're mainstream, but do any of you believe he cares about Korean media at all? You know, because Korean women are probably some of the most feminist on earth, to the point that it heavily contributes to their birth rate decline and the swath of strong female protagonists that permeate Korean media properties? He has no idea, because he can only regurgitate talking points against what's in the mainstream, because you can't grift on things people don't know about. This is why his review for season 4 of The Boys is what it is. He admits he hasn't even watched it, yet claims it has destroyed its audience, his source being the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes.
So it was off to Rotten Tomatoes for me to check out the reviews. Not the critic reviews, of course, because nobody in their right mind gives a shit what those fucking shills have got to say about anything anymore. I'm talking about the audience reviews, which is the only semi-reliable barometer for quality these days, and oh.
Besides the fact that TV show reviews on Rotten Tomatoes aren't verified, meaning they are subject to review bombs, why doesn't he keep this same energy with, I don't know, The Marvels, Black Widow, or Quantumania, movies that have pretty good audience scores? Seems like Drinker is the living embodiment of this meme, doesn't it? Of course he'll never come out and say, I don't want to see black people in lead roles, or I'm tired of female protagonists, like The Quartering stupidly did. It's because being that he's selling something, he has something to lose, so he has to communicate in dog whistles to maintain the facade of plausible deniability. And Will, I know you're watching, so let me finally address you directly. Film reviews are not your personal soapbox to air out your grievances with minority groups and those that advocate for them. It's irresponsible to your, my, and every other audience that consumes film and teaches them nothing about the art form. You create a hostile environment for neutral people that may stumble across your slop, where they may assume that film criticism is full of people like you. You do a disservice to the craft and give the rest of film YouTube a bad name. I think I speak on behalf of every reasonable film reviewer out there. Go away now.